The Grand Lecture Hall at NYU Stern School of Business was buzzing with the usual mix of undergraduate and MBA students, eager to engage in yet another discussion about politics, economy, and ethics. Professor Daniel Whitmore, a well-known and outspoken liberal academic, had built his reputation on fiery debates and a strong disdain for conservative ideologies. This particular afternoon, his lecture titled "The Role of Business in Modern Political Discourse" took a sharp and unexpected turn. Midway through his speech, the professor's tone shifted, his face contorted with contempt as he brought up an unusual subject: Barron Trump, the youngest son of President Donald Trump. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore began, pacing across the stage, "we are witnessing a crisis in the American education system. And what better example to discuss than Barron Trump, the privileged, spoon-fed brat of the current president?" Gasps echoed across the room. Some students chuckled uncomfortably, others shifted in their seats. They had seen Whitmore push the envelope before, but openly attacking the minor son of a sitting president was unprecedented, even for him. Born with a silver spoon, he's the epitome of entitlement. While most of you struggle with student loans, that kid, that genius prodigy, has never known hardship in his life. And what has he contributed to society? Nothing. A stunned silence fell over the room. Some students awkwardly glanced at each other, unsure of how to react. A few hard-left activists in the front row snickered, nodding in agreement. But what happened next would be talked about for generations. Unbeknownst to Professor Whitmore, Barron Trump himself was in the audience. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, the 19-year-old had been quietly attending classes at NYU Stern under a different name, hoping to experience college life away from the constant scrutiny of the media. And now, he found himself the target of a public humiliation by none other than one of NYU's most prominent professors. Barron slowly stood up. His tall frame, standing at 6 feet 7 inches, cast a noticeable shadow over the students seated nearby. The hall went dead silent as every single pair of eyes turned to him. The moment had arrived. Barron Trump was about to speak. A hush fell over the lecture hall as Barron Trump slowly rose to his feet. His 6 feet 7 inches frame loomed over the audience, his expression unreadable. Professor Whitmore's smug demeanor faltered for the first time as he noticed the piercing blue eyes staring directly at him. For a moment, Whitmore hesitated, realizing that he had just insulted a student who was sitting right in front of him. The realization dawned on the entire room at the same time. Barron Trump, son of the President of the United States, had been attending NYU Stern in secret. The air in the room was thick with tension. A student in the front row whispered, "OSH*T," as everyone braced for a heated argument. But instead of an angry outburst, Barron did something that caught everyone completely off guard. He smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Not of arrogance, not of mockery, but of confidence. Then he spoke. "Professor Whitmore," Barron said, his voice calm but firm, "I've heard a lot of opinions about my family over the years. Most of them don't bother me. But as an educator, I expected better from you." The room remained dead silent. The students knew that this moment would go viral. Someone discreetly hit the record button on their phone, capturing history in the making. Professor Whitmore, still standing on the podium, crossed his arms, trying to regain control of the situation. "Oh, and what exactly did you expect, Mr. Trump?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Barron took a step forward, addressing both the professor and the audience. "I expected a discussion based on facts, not personal attacks. You're supposed to be shaping young minds, teaching critical thinking. Instead, you chose to ridicule me. Not for anything I've done, but for my last name." Several students nodded in agreement, realizing that Barron had a point. "You called me entitled," Barron continued. "Yet here I am, sitting among students who worked hard to get here, just like me. Do you know how I got accepted into NYU Stern? Not because of my name, but because I met the requirements, just like everyone else in this room." A few gasps spread across the hall. For years, the media had painted Barron as a mystery. Silent, privileged, uninterested in politics. But here he was, standing tall and defending himself with grace and intelligence. Professor Whitmore, caught off guard by Barron's poise, narrowed his eyes. "Spare me the victim's speech, Mr. Trump," he said, regaining his usual arrogance. "Your father's administration thrived on insults and division. Why should you expect anything different?" Barron exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You just proved my point, Professor," he said. "You're not here to teach. You're here to push a narrative." The audience erupted in murmurs. Some students who had previously been Whitmore supporters began to question their allegiance. "Let me ask you this," Barron said, his tone unwavering. "Would you have said the same things if I were the son of a Democratic president?" Whitmore opened his mouth, but no words came out. That was the moment everything changed. The tension in the lecture hall was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Professor Whitmore stood frozen, caught in a moment he never expected, being confronted, publicly, by the very person he had just insulted. Barron's last question hung in the air like an unanswered challenge. "Would you have said the same things if I were the son of a Democratic president?" The professor's jaw clenched. He knew that any answer he gave would either expose his bias or make him look like a hypocrite. The students in the audience sat on the edge of their seats, their eyes darting between Barron and Whitmore. Some had been avid followers of Whitmore's liberal lectures, while others had grown tired of his one-sided rhetoric. But for the first time, even his most loyal supporters felt an unease creeping into their thoughts. Finally, Whitmore chuckled nervously, an attempt to brush off the question. "That's a hypothetical, Barron. The reality is, your father represents everything that is wrong with." Barron held up a hand, silencing him. "I didn't ask for a history lesson, Professor. I asked you a simple question," he said. "Yes or no?" Whitmore's face turned red. He knew he had walked into a trap of his own making. If he said no, he would admit that his attack on Barron was rooted in personal bias, not academic discourse. If he said yes, he risked alienating students who expected fairness from their educators. The students were no longer watching a lecture. They were watching a debate unfold in real time, and Whitmore was losing. The professor sighed, choosing to change the subject rather than answer. "Look, Barron, I think we've gotten off track here. The point I was making—" "No, Professor," Barron interrupted, his voice unwavering. "You weren't making a point. You were making an assumption about me. And worse, you did it in front of an audience, expecting me not to be here to defend myself." Some students clapped softly in agreement. Others nodded. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Whitmore took a step back, sensing that the room was shifting away from his control. His confidence wavered as he realized that this was not just another anti-Trump rant that would go unchallenged. Barron, on the other hand, remained calm. He wasn't yelling or calling names. He was doing something far more dangerous to Whitmore. He was exposing him. Then Barron delivered the final blow. "This isn't just about me," Barron continued. "This is about something bigger. We're in one of the top business schools in the world. We're supposed to be taught how to think critically, how to engage in ideas from all perspectives. Instead, we're being conditioned to believe that one side is always right and the other is always wrong." The murmurs turned into outright agreement. A few students in the back even stood up, showing their support. "And here's the real irony, Professor," Barron said, crossing his arms. "If my father had called out a professor's son by name and mocked him in public, this entire university would be demanding his resignation. But because it happened to me, it's supposed to be okay." The entire room fell silent again. Professor Whitmore opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He had lost. Barron turned slightly, glancing at the audience. "If we really believe in fairness, in truth, in education, then we should hold everyone to the same standard. No exceptions." Then he sat back down. And in that moment, NYU Stern changed forever. The moment Barron Trump sat back down, the entire lecture hall felt different. It was as if a power shift had taken place, not just between a student and a professor, but between truth and bias, confidence and hypocrisy. Professor Whitmore stood at the podium, his face flushed with frustration, yet he had no rebuttal. For years, he had controlled the narrative within these walls. His word had been law, his opinions unchallenged. But today, that illusion was shattered. Some students sat in stunned silence, still processing what had just happened. Others whispered to their neighbors, their expressions ranging from shock to admiration. And then, from somewhere in the middle of the hall, a single clap echoed through the room. Another followed, then another, and suddenly, the entire room erupted in applause. Professor Whitmore's eyes widened. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be the authority in the room. He was supposed to be the one getting the applause. But instead, the 19-year-old he had just insulted was receiving a standing ovation. Meanwhile, a student in the third row, who had secretly been recording the entire exchange, immediately uploaded the video to social media. Within minutes, the clip started spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. NYU professor gets schooled by Barron Trump. Watch his epic response. Liberal professor humiliates Barron Trump, but his response leaves everyone speechless. Barron Trump just destroyed a NYU professor in the most savage way possible. The hashtags #BarronTrumpNYU, #SternDebate, and #ProfessorExposed started trending within an hour. News outlets picked it up almost instantly. Fox News aired it with the headline, "Police car light Barron Trump defends himself against NYU professor." And it's perfect, police car light. Meanwhile, CNN cautiously reported, Red Circle Barron Trump engages in heated exchange with NYU professor, social media reacts Red Circle. Even neutral and left-leaning outlets couldn't ignore the moment. The Washington Post headline read, "Did an NYU professor just make Barron Trump the most influential student in America?" Within hours, the video crossed 10 million views. By the next morning, it had surpassed 50 million. As expected, the incident reached the White House faster than anyone anticipated. President Donald Trump, never one to miss an opportunity, tweeted almost immediately, "Proud of my son Barron. He destroyed a biased professor at NYU today." The Trump name stands for strength. Big win for free speech. United States. The White House press secretary was bombarded with questions during the daily briefing. Does President Trump believe that Professor Whitmore should be fired? One reporter asked. "We believe in academic freedom," the press secretary responded. But what happened at NYU today shows exactly what conservatives have been saying for years. There is a deep bias in higher education. The fact that a professor felt comfortable publicly insulting the president's son speaks volumes. The pressure on NYU Stern School of Business mounted rapidly. The university's official email inbox was flooded, some students and parents demanding Professor Whitmore's resignation, others praising Barron's response. The NYU Student Union released a statement. Regardless of political affiliation, no professor should personally attack a student in a public setting. We stand for an environment where all perspectives are welcome. For the first time in years, NYU's administration had no choice but to respond. The university announced an internal review into Professor Whitmore's conduct, but the damage was already done. Whitmore had become the face of academic bias, and Barron Trump had become an unexpected symbol of resilience and free speech. But this was only the beginning. Something much bigger was about to unfold. Professor Whitmore sat alone in his dimly lit office, staring at his computer screen. His inbox was flooded with thousands of emails, some supporting him, but most condemning him for personally attacking a student in front of an audience. The NYU administration had already called him in for a meeting, where they made it clear that the university was under immense pressure to address the incident. Donors were pulling funding. Alumni were speaking out. Even some of his fellow professors, liberals like him, were saying that he had gone too far. But the worst part? His reputation was crumbling before his eyes. A longtime champion of academic freedom, he had always been respected in liberal circles. He had written best-selling books on progressive economics, had been invited to speak on MSNBC and CNN, and was widely admired by students until now. Now he was being compared to a bully. The video of Barron Trump calmly dismantling his argument was everywhere. The comments online were brutal. Whitmore just got owned by a 19-year-old. This guy calls himself an intellectual? He couldn't even answer a simple question. No wonder students don't trust their professors anymore. They're too busy pushing agendas. His Twitter account was in shambles. His publisher had postponed his next book launch. And worst of all, his tenure was now in jeopardy. Whitmore gritted his teeth. He had to fight back. The next morning, Whitmore appeared on MSNBC, ready to do damage control. The anchor, a sympathetic figure, introduced him. Dr. Whitmore, let's talk about what happened at NYU. You've been accused of unfairly attacking Barron Trump. How do you respond? Whitmore forced a small chuckle, as if the entire controversy was ridiculous. Look, I think this has been blown out of proportion. What I said wasn't meant to be a personal attack. It was a critique of privilege, something we discuss all the time in academia. The anchor nodded. But some are saying that if Barron Trump had been the son of a Democrat, you wouldn't have made those comments. Whitmore hesitated. The same question Barron had asked him in the lecture hall had now followed him to national television. He took a breath. I would have said the same thing about anyone born into power. This isn't about partisanship. But the audience wasn't buying it. Conservative commentators pounced immediately. Tucker Carlson went on air that night and tore Whitmore apart. This is what happens when you let radical left-wing activists run our universities. They don't teach. They don't educate. They don't encourage critical thinking. They just spew hatred at anyone who doesn't conform to their views. Ben Shapiro posted a video titled, "Loudspeaker Barron Trump just crushed an NYU professor. Here's why it matters, loudspeaker." The media war had begun. And Barron Trump? He hadn't even made a public statement yet. For days, news networks, journalists, and political commentators tried to get a response from Barron. Would he go on Fox News? Would he issue a statement? Would he address the controversy? But Barron stayed silent. Until he didn't. One evening, Barron posted a simple message on Twitter/X. If a professor can publicly insult me today, they can insult you tomorrow. Think about it. That one tweet, just 19 words long, got over 10 million likes in 24 hours. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't political. But it was powerful. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. This wasn't just about Trump versus liberals anymore. This was about free speech, fairness, and the state of American universities. And now, Barron Trump was at the center of it all. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Barron's 19-word tweet sent shockwaves across the country. Political analysts dissected it on cable news. Conservative outlets hailed him as a fighter for free speech, while liberal commentators claimed he was playing the victim card. At college campuses across the U.S., the debate over academic bias and free expression intensified. NYU students staged protests on both sides. Some held signs reading, "Fire Whitmore," "No more bully professors." Others countered with, "Barron equals privilege." Free speech is not equal to free from criticism. Even celebrities weighed in. Elon Musk retweeted Barron's post and added, "This is the biggest problem in education today. Universities should teach how to think, not what to think." Meanwhile, Hollywood rallied behind Whitmore. A-list actors, progressive activists, and talk show hosts called Barron's response disingenuous. On The View, Joy Behar scoffed, "Oh please, Barron Trump isn't some poor, oppressed college kid. He's a billionaire's son. Let's not pretend he's a victim here." But the American people, they saw through the noise. Polls showed a staggering public shift. Bar chart: should professors be allowed to personally attack students in class? Yes, 22%. No, 78%. Bar chart: was Barron Trump treated unfairly? Yes, 64%. No, 36%. The numbers didn't lie. Americans were siding with Barron. And NYU? They had no choice but to act. Facing immense pressure, NYU's Board of Trustees held an emergency meeting. Donors were threatening to pull millions of dollars. Alumni, some of whom were powerful Wall Street executives, were calling for action. Even some liberal professors admitted that Whitmore had crossed a line. After 3 grueling hours behind closed doors, a decision was reached. The next morning, an official NYU statement was released. After careful review, Professor Whitmore has been placed on indefinite administrative leave. NYU remains committed to fostering an environment of open discourse, where all students are treated with respect, regardless of their backgrounds. The news spread like wildfire. Whitmore was out. Barron Trump had won. Enraged by NYU's decision, Whitmore refused to go down quietly. That night, he went on CNN furious. "I was punished for telling the truth. This wasn't about Barron Trump. This was about power, and I was silenced for questioning it." The host nodded sympathetically, but the damage was done. Whitmore had become a symbol of academic overreach, and Barron Trump had become the face of a new cultural shift. What started as a single insult in a lecture hall had turned into a national reckoning. But Barron's story was far from over, because what he did next, no one saw it coming. With Professor Whitmore placed on leave, many expected Barron Trump to step away from the spotlight and return to his studies. But Barron had other plans. The media frenzy around him had made one thing clear: there was a serious problem in America's universities. Professors pushed political agendas instead of teaching. Students feared speaking their minds if their views didn't align with progressive ideology. Free speech was under attack. And Barron Trump? He had become the unlikely face of change. So, rather than backing down, he doubled down. A week after Whitmore's suspension, Barron stood on the steps of NYU's main building, facing a crowd of students and reporters. Dressed in a simple navy suit, he spoke with confidence. "I didn't come to NYU for politics. I came here to learn. But what I've seen in the past week proves that something is deeply wrong in our universities. Professors shouldn't be using classrooms as political battlegrounds. Students shouldn't be afraid to speak up. And most importantly, our universities should be places where all ideas are welcome, not just the ones certain people approve of." The crowd erupted in applause. Barron continued. "So today, I'm announcing the Barron Trump Scholarship for Free Thought. This scholarship will support students, regardless of their political beliefs, who believe in open debate, critical thinking, and academic freedom. Because in America, we don't silence people. We listen, we challenge, and we grow." Journalists scrambled to get the details. The scholarship, personally funded by Barron and backed by private donors, would award $1 million in grants to students who faced academic discrimination. It was a game changer. Suddenly, Barron Trump wasn't just a student who stood up to a professor. He was leading a movement. And people took notice. The news made headlines instantly. That evening, during a press conference, a reporter asked President Trump, "Mr. President, what are your thoughts on Barron launching this scholarship?" The president grinned. "My son is a very smart young man, and he's doing what I've always said. He's standing up for what's right. I'm incredibly proud of him. A lot of people are proud of him." Liberal critics panicked. MSNBC ran a segment claiming Barron was using this controversy to push a conservative agenda. The New York Times published an op-ed titled "Barron Trump's Dangerous New Movement," warning that his actions could embolden right-wing extremism on college campuses. But the American public? They overwhelmingly supported him. Polls showed that 72% of Americans agreed that universities had become too biased. Even some Democrats admitted that Barron had a point. But while Barron's movement was gaining traction, one person wasn't done fighting. Professor Whitmore was about to launch his own counterattack. As Barron Trump's scholarship announcement made waves across the nation, Professor Whitmore was seething. Sitting in his apartment, surrounded by stacks of political books and his laptop blaring cable news, he watched his reputation crumble. He had gone from a respected NYU professor to a symbol of academic bias, all because of one exchange with a student. But he wasn't about to go down without a fight. He picked up his phone and dialed a contact. "Set up the interview," he said. "I'm ready to tell my side of the story." 2 nights later, Professor Whitmore sat across from Anderson Cooper on CNN. "Professor, let's start with the basics," Cooper said. "You've been accused of unfairly targeting Barron Trump. What do you say to your critics?" Whitmore leaned forward. He had rehearsed this answer. This was never about Barron personally. This was about privilege. The son of a billionaire doesn't know what it's like to struggle. And frankly, he used his last name to turn this into a national scandal. Anderson Cooper nodded, but then asked, "But some would say you made it personal. You insulted him, and instead of responding with anger, he debated you and won. Do you regret your approach?" Whitmore's jaw tightened. "No. What I regret is that people are falling for this narrative that Barron Trump is some sort of hero for free speech. He's not. He's just another rich kid using the media to his advantage." The interview did not land well. Within minutes, clips of Whitmore's dismissive tone flooded social media. On Twitter/X, the top comment under the clip was, "He sounds like a sore loser who got embarrassed by a 19-year-old. Fox News pounced immediately, running a segment titled, "Loudspeaker Professor Still Won't Admit He Was Wrong. The Arrogance of Academia Loudspeaker." The media backlash was even worse than before. But Barron Trump? He didn't even respond. He didn't have to. While Whitmore's CNN disaster unfolded, Barron was preparing for his next move. And then, something unexpected happened. One of Hollywood's biggest stars, a well-known Democrat, tweeted, "You don't have to like Donald Trump to admit that what happened to Barron at NYU was wrong. Universities should be places of learning, not political bullying." Barron handled it better than most adults would have. The tweet came from Matthew McConaughey, and it changed everything. Liberal media froze, conservatives celebrated, and Barron Trump's movement got even bigger. Now, it wasn't just conservatives defending him. Moderates and even some Democrats were speaking out. Whitmore? He had officially lost the public. And NYU had a decision to make. Because firing Whitmore now seemed like the only way to stop the damage. The day after Whitmore's disastrous CNN interview, NYU's Board of Trustees met in another emergency session. This time, they weren't just dealing with donors and public opinion, they were facing a potential lawsuit. A group of NYU students, some of whom weren't even Trump supporters, had come forward with their own stories of being harassed by biased professors. One student, a sophomore majoring in political science, told the New York Post, "It's not just Barron Trump. If you don't agree with your professor, you get lower grades, you get mocked, you get ostracized." Another student, an African-American woman who described herself as a centrist, revealed, "I once asked a question about conservative economic policies, and my professor told me I sounded like a Republican sellout. I had nothing to do with Trump, but this is the environment at NYU." The university was now under scrutiny like never before, and the Board of Trustees had no choice. The next morning, NYU released a final statement. After a thorough review, Professor Whitmore's conduct has been found inconsistent with NYU's values of academic freedom and respect for students. Effective immediately, he is relieved of his teaching duties. Whitmore was fired. The media exploded. CNN. NYU caves to conservative pressure? Was this fair? Fox News. Victory for free speech. Barron Trump takes down a corrupt professor. The New York Times. Academic freedom under threat? NYU's controversial decision stirs debate. Whitmore, now jobless, went on one last desperate rant on MSNBC. "This isn't about me. This is about the rise of Trumpism in higher education. If they can cancel me, who's next?" But no one was listening anymore. Barron Trump had won. That night, Barron broke his silence with one last message on Twitter/X. It was never about politics. It was about fairness. Students shouldn't be bullied by professors. End of story. That tweet got over 2 million likes in 24 hours. Barron wasn't just a student anymore. He had become a symbol of something bigger. And as the media storm settled, one question remained. What would he do next? With Professor Whitmore officially fired and the media frenzy slowly winding down, the world expected Barron Trump to return to a normal student life. But Barron? He had other plans. The Barron Trump Scholarship for Free Thought had gone viral. Within a week, it had received over $50 million in private donations from conservative business leaders, free speech advocates, and even a few Hollywood figures who believed in academic fairness. Students from all over the country started sharing their stories. A UCLA student who got a failing grade for writing a paper supporting capitalism. A Harvard freshman who was pressured to change her political views to avoid social backlash. A Michigan professor who admitted that he feared losing his job if he criticized progressive ideologies in class. What had started as one professor insulting Barron Trump had now become a national movement. And Barron? He had unexpectedly become the face of a generational shift. One evening, while Barron was studying in his dorm, his phone buzzed. It was a call from the White House. President Trump, his father, was on the line. "Barron, I just got off the phone with Tucker Carlson. You know what he told me? He said you're one of the most influential young voices in America right now. That's a big deal." Barron smiled. "I wasn't trying to be Dad. I just wanted to do what was right." His father paused for a moment before speaking. "That's exactly why you're winning." Barron had always been Donald Trump's quietest child. But now he was stepping into his own spotlight. And for the first time, the world wasn't seeing him as just the son of a president. They were seeing him as a leader. The media couldn't ignore it anymore. Barron Trump's name was now being floated in conservative circles as a potential leader for a new era of free speech advocacy. Some even started jokingly suggesting, "Loudspeaker Barron Trump 2040? Loudspeaker." He was young, intelligent, and most importantly, he had just proven that he could take on the establishment and win. And as he walked through the NYU campus, students whispered his name with a mix of admiration and curiosity. Because deep down, everyone knew it. This wasn't just about a professor's insult anymore. It was about a young man who had changed the conversation in America. And this was just the beginning.